I wanted to make an update video on my monitors because I have ATC 50's now that I've been using for about the past 6 weeks or so. And I also tried the 45's in here. So I think I'm coming from a unique place that maybe other people, if you've tried 45's, but you haven't tried 50's, or vice versa, you have 50's and never tried 45's, you might want to just hear what somebody has to say about it. Now, let's just start by saying where you position these speakers make a huge difference. If the speakers are closer to the back wall, they will give you a bit more bass. When I started using these, I had them very up, like up close to the desk, almost like near fields, but just like right behind the console, and they sounded really good. But for me, I actually had to back my desk up a bit from the front wall so that I became approximately a third into the room. And then the speakers being right up near the desk wasn't as good as closer to the wall. So what I wound up doing is, I have heavy duty treatment behind both speakers, and the speakers are approximately like there's room to walk comfortably between the desk and the speakers. So they're not right up on my desk. That extra bit of distance does a lot for allowing bass development. Now, when I tried the 45's, I used the exact same positioning. Like, I tried them up by the desk and I tried them back close to the wall. Now, I also tried the desk in the middle of the room and now about a third of the way into the room, in addition to as close to the front wall as I could get it. So I tried the same three positions with both sets of speakers. And what I could tell you is, in my opinion, the bass response on the ATC 50's is substantially greater than the bass response on the 45's. Now, I noticed because there's every once in a while I get a comment from the video I made where I was explaining the differences between like the Key 3s that I had tried and the 45's and the Genelec 8361As. You should check this video out if you haven't seen it. But on that video, I basically the summation of the video was that the 45's sounded great to me, and I loved the way they sounded, but felt like I might have been missing some bass, and I wanted a little more bass out of them. But it was mainly because of an issue with the speaker that I don't still have those. I would have kept them and probably been happy and been fine. But what I wound up doing is I had to return them because there was an issue with the speaker. Now, when I got the 50's, because I decided they would have been great if they had a little more bass, I went with the 50's, and I'm pleasantly surprised that not only is the bass more substantial, it's also cleaner. What I mean by cleaner, no distortion. It doesn't sound like if you've ever taken a saturation plugin and put it on a low setting, like the low end of the saturation on like the saturation knob, for example, by Softtube. If you set it to the low and then you saturate, what does it sound like? Or like the HG2, if you set that to low, it has low, flat, and highs. If you set it to low and saturate, that sound of a saturated low end is the opposite of what these sound like. So I could see why somebody, if you're not listening for, if you're used to hearing saturated bass is the best way to say it, it's hard to kind of wrap your head around the fact that this is not that. This is a very clean bass sound. Now, the best reason to have a clean bass sound is because you're not fooled by like additional harmonics that are saturation that's there, some color. You're not fooled by a color in the low end that doesn't exist when you get out of your room. That's the best part about it, in my opinion, is it allows me to hear what's really there from an uncolored source. Now, when I use like the Alexa Bluetooth speaker or a Sonos, I find like, and most people I found who use ATC 50's, like Ben Babty, for example, and he uses them because he used them for so long with Tom Elmhurst, who also uses 50's. So a lot of these guys, like Ben Babty, also uses a Bluetooth speaker. And it wasn't until I started doing that that I realized that every sort of little Bluetooth speaker there is, none of them are clean bass. Zero of them. They are saturated, distorted bass meant to make you feel like there's a lot of low end coming from those little speakers that have very tiny, small drivers in them because they're tiny speakers. So they have to, and they make up for it by putting in that sort of saturated, gross bass sound in order to make it sound like it's not small, like it's not thin. They do that. So actually really helpful to take your mix after using the 50s for like 80% of the mix, put it on those Bluetooth speakers, and then all of a sudden you hear what happens to your mix when it does go through this saturated, gross colored sound. So the way I look at it is the 45s are so far from gross, saturated, bad bass. They're really good. They are not the same thing as this gross saturated sound that you would get from like a cheap set of monitors, okay? Like, a bad I don't want to name any names because I don't want to offend anybody who may have a cheap set of monitors, but the point is the way that those sound is not what I'm talking about when I say the 45s sound like that. That's not at all. All I'm saying is when I'm comparing the 45s on the way the bass sounded, I felt like there was a little bit of a lack of bass. Not that the 45s sounded, like there was a saturated gross bass. The 45s to me felt like they were less balanced of a speaker, meaning on the 50s, the highs, the mids, and the lows feel like they are balanced. There's like the right amount of all of those elements. Whereas on the 45s now, if I were to compare it to those, the mids sounded like they were more substantial, like more mid-range than the highs and more mid-range than the lows. So the balance of the speaker was completely different. Now, anybody who thinks there's more bass on the 45s, I think what you're really saying, because when we use terms like bass, I think you're referring to low mids or thinking you have the impression of more bass because you're hearing not real low end bass. You're talking about low mid bass. You're talking about more mid range, which means to you, you hear more bass in the mids because you have more mid range. That could be what you're saying or thinking. If you feel like when you hear those, there's more bass, that could be it. It could also be the fact that if you've tried them both, did you try them in your studio where you had the ability to change the height to make it perfect for you? Because, I got these Space Lab stands that are able to be raised and lowered, and I use my 50s horizontally because the desk I have is designed, it's one of these Argosy desks that's designed like a console with a meter bridge. So to get the speakers to be the right height for me, I had to use them horizontally. Otherwise, it would be too high, and if I lowered it, too much of it would be hitting the desk. Just so anybody with a console, like Tom Elmhurst, like Ben Babty, you'll see they use them this way. Even Michael Brower, when he was using the 50s at the console, they're turned this way, horizontally. And if you have these things set at the wrong height, you won't hear them the way you should. So whenever I hear somebody, who tries these things out at a studio that's not their own or something, I often wonder if like, because I know they didn't have the ability to change everything around. Like they couldn't change the height of the speaker, and odds are you're not the same, height where your ears are as the guy who's owns the studio probably, and he might have them dialed in for him, but are they dialed in for you? Did you spend an hour listening to them, or did you try to make mixes on them or work, just listen to music on them for 30 days straight? Like, what did you do? So all this stuff matters. And there's always going to be some inherent bias in some way. But when I did some research on why is it that I'm hearing the bass in the way that I'm hearing it, the fact that the driver on the 50s is that super linear driver, it's not the same driver as on the 45s. It produces a different result. And depending on what you consider low end to you, if you consider it part of the mid range, then that would make sense why the 45s feel like they have more low end to you, because I don't. I consider low end to be below the mid range. So when I hear the 50s, I hear a balanced sound all the way from low to high, and I don't use them with a sub, and I don't feel like they're lacking bass. And this is also coming right after trying the key threes. And if you like, as I said in that other video, those key threes, they sounded great. They sounded like there was a ton of bass on them. So I'm coming from speakers with a ton of bass. And I could tell you that from trying to work on those for about 30 days, everything I listened to on them music-wise, like mixed by Brendan O'Brien, or everything I listened to on them sounded amazing. Literally everything, even mixes that I know are terrible, sounded great on those. And then I tried to mix on them, and everything I did, every move I made sounded great on the Key 3s. That's how I knew I couldn't use them. That's how I know they're great speakers if you wanna dazzle people in your control room and listen to something that sounds amazing, but at the same time, if you're trying to critically listen, it's not the same speaker you would want, in my opinion, because every change I made was also good. No matter what, you make any tweaks, it sounds great. I don't know how anybody could work like that. But at the same time, I could understand why somebody would want to put those on if they wanted people to sit in the control room and be like, wow. So it's a totally different speaker. But coming right after hearing those, I could tell you that these have less bass than the Keys. They do, but it's not a bad thing. It's actually a more balanced sound from the point of view of critical listening. That's how I look at it. And as a result, when I make a tweak, I hear the tweak and I hear it going from good to worse. And then it's like everything feels like it's under uh, uh, it's almost like a microscope. You're under a microscope. There's a super clear, defined picture of what you're hearing. There's no blur, there's no distortion, there's no saturation. It's just crystal clear looking glass of what the sound is. And, using these without room correction software, because, my room wasn't designed by Haverstick. It was not. And if it was, that would be great. But it wasn't, because, that wasn't in the cards for me at the moment. But I could tell you that using the Trinov with the ATC 50's are phenomenal. I mean, the Trinov makes the image from the ATC 50's go from, wherever it is, because it's not to the millimeter exactly lined up the way it maybe should be. As soon as I turn the Trinov on with the microphone right where my ears are, right, as soon as I do that, shoo, it just like snaps into place. The most center image I've ever heard, which is what makes it easier to make certain decisions. I can understand why so many people now, it's like, if you know your room really, 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 really well, I could understand why you might not need a Trinov. Because if you are comfortable getting mixes the way you're hearing it, why change that? I guarantee the person who's comfortable with that is also not moving their speakers around. They're not changing anything up. They're not moving their desk. They're not moving their listening position. Like, it's all staying there, staying exactly where it is because they're comfortable. And where I'm at now, like I said, I've only been in this room the last, 4 or 5 months, something like that. And I've been on these speakers for about 5, 6 weeks. So when I think about that, it's like, I've got a ways to go to learn the room, to learn the speakers. But wow, am I happy with the purchase? I can't even tell you how happy I am with the purchase. Because if I wasn't, I'd have just returned these to get the 45's. I spent a lot of time listening to music on the 45's and a lot of time listening on these, and I could tell you, I prefer these. I prefer the size of the image. It feels like it extends deeper because I'm hearing more low end. The true definition of low end to me, which is not low mids. It's not the same thing. So I think everybody, hopefully gets where I'm coming from. If you have questions, throw it in there. And I'm by no means disparaging the ATC 45's. They are great. And if I didn't have a problem with the ATC 45's, I would have probably never got to these. They are just amazing, though. And I'm so happy I did, because I can tell you for a certainty that my speaker journey is over. There's no more searching for speakers for me. I don't plan on trying anything else out for the foreseeable forever, because once you learn your speakers, changing them up is not something that anybody would want to do, I think, because it takes a long time to learn your speakers. People talk about working on them for a year plus, and then once you do that, you'll have a sense of really everything they should be telling you, and you'll be able, that's what you need. So changing your speakers like every year before you get to that point is crazy. And prior to owning these, I worked on NS10s for a really long time, and I worked on Barefoot 01s for a long time also, side by side with the NS10s. Like, I used them both. Everybody keep in mind, the height of these things matters so much. It took me a while to realize what height they should be. I had to get out the laser pointer with a level and put that right on my ear and have somebody help me make sure that the level was right, so I know it's pointed straight and not all crooked and cockeyed. And I had to get it going right at in this case, because it's a three-way, the mid-range dome, and there's a sweet spot on how much higher the mid-range dome should be than your ear. And look this stuff up. It's in the manual for whatever speaker you want to buy. I'm sure it says what the optimum positioning is for where your ear and where either the mid-range dome or the tweeter, depending on if it's two-way or three-way, should be. And I made videos kind of going more deep into that. So if you want to check that out, I'll make sure to link to that. So any questions, any comments, leave it in there. I appreciate it. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't. More stuff to come. Evan Jaffe Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.